And that does absolutely sound like a big challenge. And I mean, how do we see in terms of, we know up until now that measuring the hard metrics has been relatively simple once the tools are put in place, but what do you guys think is most important to measure from that soft point of view?
I think everyone talks about the S word quite a bit. It's certainly important. I think it is good to know, but I think that really it comes down to, and probably another buzzword is engagement, but it really comes down to people really caring about a brand. But even things like the S word, they're really only useful when they're balanced with some really smart topic analysis, and when we actually understand. Because if I was a business and I said, well, 90% of my users are saying they feel really positively about my brand, well, that's one thing. But what if the 10% are all upset about the same thing? That's a very easy thing to start measuring, to start understanding and apply some changes to my business from. So I guess...
Yeah. Mary Claire, do you have any thoughts on this? How do we figure out ways to measure these soft parts of the journey?
Well, I think there's a few different ways that it can be done. It's extremely difficult. Sentiment analysis is one of the holy grails of computing. It's one of our grand challenges. And to do it, you need a combination of artificial intelligence, and at this point in time, AI isn't that mature. We also need cognitive linguistics and psychologists in there as well, who are competent with computing. And we also need, that wasn't a dig, but we also need, to understand language really well. And natural language processing at this time, and the tools that we have come an awful long way, I'd say in the last 10 years especially, but we're not really, anywhere close to being able to say, wow, this comment is positive. But then, there are different gradients as well. How positive? I mean, is it angry and that's positive, or is it, is that a negative thing? So it's an extremely complex area, and I don't think that technically we're anywhere close to doing that to the extent that we need it.
So, I mean, anyone in this room who's ever experienced any kind of social media report or social media monitoring, tracking report that they might have gotten through, an agency, a vendor, a client, whatever, often, more times than not these days, you see a lot of them will have sentiment tracking or some kind of sentiment needle, red, blue kind of thing attached to it. What's this stuff based on, and how valuable is it as information at this point in time, given what you've said about the technology behind it not necessarily being there yet?
Well, a lot of the things that I have seen, including my own work, was mostly based around n-gram analysis, which is, you use a combination of this word is next to this word, and these are usually in a positive sentence, or this kind of thing. So you apply a bunch of hard rules to language, which makes it, it's a brute force approach, and it'll work to an extent, but it won't work as well as you're all hoping. So it's really good because it's a start, but it's not the end result yet. We're not all the way there.
Andrew, how do you think these tools are doing the sentiment component?
I think that the definition of context and the sentiments that sit around specific online components, such as video, can offer a lot more insight than currently is actually being demonstrated. One comment to a company on a TVC, for example, that's being used in an online campaign, could actually be the determining factor for them actually committing budget to creating web-only content in the future, because that one comment may be seeded and distributed everywhere. The sentiment of the comment may be very basic, but until the tools are able to almost add an extra dimension to that, which is almost like we're attributing a specific value or a weight to individual comments, it's going to be very difficult to say this is a better comment than another, and that at the moment is a manual process with many of the reporting tools that are out there.
Earlier, Andrew, you mentioned that a lot of people don't necessarily put this analytics stuff in correctly, or it's not placed in the right spot, or it doesn't work, or it's not implemented the right way. What do all three of you think on the fact of the whole job of the analytics, where does it sit? Is it something that naturally sits with a client? Does it naturally sit with an agency or a partner? Or does it sit somewhere else altogether? We saw in the world of search marketing and search optimization a whole bunch of boutique agencies pop up who are very, very good at what they do. Where do we see this space fitting in the grand scheme of things in the future?
Ultimately, the responsibility's got to sit with the client. However, we as specialists, we have to obviously give direction to the client to ensure that obviously different agencies and different clients will outsource production to boutique web development agencies, PR agencies to manage social media campaigns, and almost impressing upon people that implementing tracking with every single link that they're building, be that from a Facebook event to a Facebook fan page, or from a Facebook campaign page to their website, or the list is endless. Unless they actually start tracking this information, they're not going to generate any insight as to the performance of each individual component of their digital campaign.
So for the moment, you're saying that it should sit with the partners.
It has to sit with the partners because there's just not the knowledge of basic analytics for a lot of clients, and the education process is driven by everybody actually. From a web development side all the way up to kind of digital strategists, and those kind of responsibilities are, you must implement analytics at every single stage, and until we get to that point, somebody's going to have to remind the client on a regular basis. And at the moment I'm finding that educating about the benefits of analytics rather than the results that are being derived from it is the biggest problem.
Mitch, what about yourself? I mean, you work for a company that has both client and partners using your products. What are you finding? Which is the more successful? Which has less issues? What seems to be the right mix?
It's hard to say what's more successful because it is really unique on a business-by-business basis. But at the end of the day, I would say that no one really understands the core metrics of a business better than the people who work inside that business. It's great to think that there are agency partners out there that are trustworthy to go out there and audit their own work, and that they'll be super honest about what's happening, and I'm sure that they all would in a room full of them. But at the end of the day, each business has its own metrics, both internally and externally, and the way in which you understand, the effectiveness is different from business to business. So, from what we're seeing, we are seeing a lot more clients uptaking this kind of thing in regards to actually starting to get understandings of, well, we're being told this by our agency, what's the reality of our business, and what can we garnish from ourselves from the web. And we're also equally seeing, some partners getting in there who are delivering some really great reports and some really great value add over the top of what we do as well. So it's about what works. I don't think that there is any one single method for it, but I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, the person that should judge a lot of the metrics is the people inside the business, because they're the ones that actually understand the effect. Excellent.
We've got a really interesting question coming up via the Twitter stream, which I can finally see again. It's coming from Mike Z. And it's basically saying a lot of clients want sales, not sentiment, and don't necessarily care about the sentiment unless they can track it through to a practical return on their investment in all these tools and these platforms. So the example he uses is everyone loves Guinness, but nobody drinks it. So how do we practically tie back in this concept of sentiment and tracking sentiment to real business value?
I think when we start seeing metrics like view-through become more prominent, I think we'll see a lot more of that.
Sorry, could you explain view-through for anyone who hasn't heard that term?
Sorry, view-through is the idea that traditionally online marketers measure by clicks and views, whereas view-through actually says, well, if I go and look at a Ford Fiesta ad today and then I buy a Ford Fiesta ad, not an ad, but a vehicle in 6 months' time, we can attribute that sale backwards by saying, well, that ad was clearly effective at some point along the line in my decision making. Now, that's the really tough thing about sentiment, because most brands that are going to turn around and spend a lot of money on online marketing, on digital strategy, on metrics, are probably brands that have a longer sales cycle. They're not selling candy bars via, Facebook. So a lot of these people who turn around and actually start investing this kind of money and time, the way to track that, through view-through and things like that, being able to understand the sentiment is probably the start of the process, but actually tracking that through to sale is a lot different thing.